the story of Happyface begins with me in New York at Comic-Con, kind of down on my luck, selling what remains of Emo Boy, which was the comic I did prior to any of this happening. My only published work at that point was this comic book, Emo Boy, published by Slave Labor Graphics. This is the mid-2000s, so I believe this was like 2007. Emo Boy had come to an end. We had run 11 issues which were printed, and we did one digital only issue. We had our trade paperback collections, and it was over. So for all intents and purposes, I was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. I'm at this convention, I'm selling comics. I met this editor at Little Brown Books for Young Readers, Connie Shu, who would change my life from that point. A few days after the con, I get an email from this Connie stating she works at Little Brown Books for Young Readers, and she had a conversation with me and bought my comic book Emo Boy, and she thought I had a great voice for young adult, asked me if I had any ideas for writing a book or doing young adult novels. So first thing I was like, Little Brown Books for Young Readers, never heard of it, let me look this up. It's the company that published Catcher in the Rye, like they're pretty legit. So I say, sure, yeah, absolutely. I have plenty of ideas. I would love to do young adult novels.
I was volunteering at the LBYR booth at the New York Comic-Con, where I met Stephen Emond, who was signing his Emo Boy comic book series. I walked up to his booth, picked up Emo Boy, read it, liked it, and decided he should write a book. I was young, green, and naive, so I approached him with the line, "Hey, do you want to write a book?" I didn't even have a business card or anything proving that I was from Little Brown, but for some reason Steve believed me. He said he was definitely into YA and that he had ideas galore. I later found out that he didn't. A few weeks later, Alvina and I met Steve for lunch, and he had 7 ideas on hand, each concept typed up on full-color one-sheets with art. Steve had many amazing ideas, running the gamut from a metaphysical sci-fi fantasy romance adventure involving a reimagined Greek underworld to a realistic story told through journal entries about a boy, a family tragedy, and how he reinvents himself to hide from his painful past. It was called Happyface, and there was something about it that felt really raw, honest, and compelling, even though the description was under 300 words. It spoke to both Alvina and me, and we both agreed that we should pursue Happyface. Connie Shu.
So I met with Alvina and Connie at a restaurant in New York, and I brought several ideas that I was able to kind of whip up. I was not confident in what young adult even was, so I was trying to do my research. The one book that I read and really loved was Perks of Being a Wallflower. That one, the kind of shy protagonist, teen, awkward male who had a hard time fitting in. I was like, that's me. Like, I could write this. I've lived this. I could do young adult. I know young adult. I came up with 7 different pitches, and I made little graphics and art and brought this little folder of pitches with me. Spent most of the lunch talking about Dawson's Creek and Beverly Hills 90210 and teenage shows that I loved, but I was able to pitch these different ideas. One of them was a grandiose sci-fi epic that's turned into this horror webcomic that I'm currently working on, so this has been around for a decade. One of them was Norma Nobody, the girl who was desperate to get any class superlative, and every book she would be trying to be the best at something. And one of them was Happyface. And Happyface kind of started from literally just writing down that title and thinking about a character who was pretending to be happy but was hurt inside. So we did go over those. The 2 that Connie and Alvina liked were the sci-fi epic, which seemed like a big commercial book, and Happyface, which seemed like a quieter literary tale. We decided that I should try to do the Happyface book. So Connie sent me some more books to read, more stuff in the young adult genre, things published by Little Brown, and she sent me Cormier's I Am the Cheese, which is a a classic book about a unreliable narrator, which was kind of the big hook, the literary hook of Happyface, is that he's somebody that's telling you a story, but he's not telling you the full story. He's not telling you about the damage inside. He's telling you about his exciting new life and his new friends. So she wanted me to read something with an unreliable narrator to kind of get that into my head. So from that point on, in mid-2007, I was considering myself an author now. I was done with comic books. Emo Boy had tanked and gone away. I was done with that world. I wanted to move on. I'm going to be a literary novelist and write this big, grandiose, indie darling book kind of thing. And I had my new career set out. I was going to be an author now. So the following months, I'm learning that maybe I'm not fully prepared to be an author yet. Turns out it's difficult to write a book. I had to read a lot. I was reading more than I ever read in my life. Reading books about writing and how to structure a novel, reading actual young adult novels. So this is 2007. This is about a year after a major breakup in my life. I had just moved to a new place. I had a lot of change going on in my life. I was making new friends and trying to adjust to that. So much going on, and on top of that, I'm trying to write a book. And in addition to that, I'm actually writing an Emo Boy movie, which also came out of New York Comic Con. Dan at SLG spoke to some people at a movie company. This guy that had taken the Shrek children's books and made like a movie out of them, and they wanted to move into live action. They had tried obtaining the rights to Scott Pilgrim, but that went to Edgar Wright. So they thought Emo Boy could be a movie. So I'm trying to write a movie and trying to write Happyface at the same time. And these are both by far the biggest things I've ever had in my career. And they both kind of fell into my lap at the same time. Let me just back up a bit for a second. In a lot of ways, it seems like this was very fortuitous and that this kind of fell into my lap and that I lucked out, and this editor from this major publisher just happened to send me an email and say, hey, do you want to write a book? Which isn't how it happens. So there was a lot of luck. There was a lot of opportunity to strike at the exact right time, but I was able to take advantage of the opportunity because of the work I had done. I've drawn my entire life since I was a kid. I mean, I've always wanted to be an artist. I've always wanted to be a comic book artist. Writing is something that came to me in high school, and I wanted to write these comics about my friends and myself and in our world in high school there. And I had been writing and I had been drawing and creating characters for as long as I've known how to. So it's something that I've spent my entire life getting to this point where I was able to pitch a comic book that got published and write 12 issues of that comic book, each one of those having the beginning and the middle and the end, learning over years and years, working on my comic strip, trying to figure out how a story works. So by the time I got this email that said, hey, do you have any ideas for a young adult book, I was able to put my head into that world and come up with some ideas and capitalize on that. So in a lot of ways, yeah, I was really lucky and the timing was great. And in a lot of ways, it's something that I prepared my whole life for. So I always tell people that are interested in publishing, do it because you love it and because you have to do it. And then when you get that lucky break, knock on wood, hopefully you get that lucky break. Hopefully those things come together at just the right moment. I remember telling my therapist that I wasn't a big networker and that I don't network, and everything I've done on my own, which isn't true because I went to that convention and I was meeting people at that convention. That's networking. That lucky break came from me going to a convention and selling my book. If I hadn't done that, I never would have met Connie. Anyways, that's my little story about that. So I'm working on the book. I'm working on the movie. I'm having a hard time doing both of those things. I understand how a story works instinctively, but I don't quite know how structure works and how a Hollywood movie is supposed to look and how a full 300-page novel is supposed to read. So I'm getting lots and lots of notes, and I'm getting worried that I'm going to mess both of these things up. The movie happened in 2008, which was in the middle of a writer's strike. I wasn't part of the guild, so I was able to actually go through and write the movie instead of them just hiring a different writer to do that. That's how I got that job. So this, in addition with the breakup and the move and the new friends and the new job and all this stuff going on in my life, I started having these really bad anxiety attacks and depression. I went to a doctor, and I remember telling the doctor that I don't know what I need, but I have to write this book. This book is everything to me, and I need to be able to just sit and focus and think about this book and write. And I can't. My brain's going a million miles a minute. I'm having these really bad anxiety attacks, and I can't write. So he gave me some, I think it was Prozac, and I tried it, and it completely leveled out the anxiety to the point that I'd be staring into space and not thinking anything. After like a couple days of that, I decided I don't want to do that. Like, clearly I'm having a hard time, but it's situational and I know why it's happening, and I'm just going to kind of push through it. But it was a rough time for a bit there, trying to get all these things going. So back to writing, the concept of Happyface, trying to figure out how to flesh out an entire book of kid pretending to be happy. I kind of took from where I was in my life. I had just moved. I had just left a relationship that I was very comfortable in and was kind of adapting to a new world. So that's kind of what I put Happyface through. I put him in this new world, and he was making new friends, and that's where he was doing this social experiment of what happens if I put on this happy face and I become a different person than I was in my old school. I had enough things going on at that time that I felt like I had enough emotions to tap into and things that I could talk about, that the story started to come together. Another thing was Connie was pushing for me to use art in my book. I was kind of dead set against it at first because I had just come from the comic book world, and I felt like they didn't support Emo Boy. The sales just started low and went lower. I was kind of excited to make that jump over into becoming an author, and I just wanted to start from scratch and just write a book, and that was my only concern. Connie's point was that I could draw, so why would I not use that? Not every author can draw, and it gives me an advantage on my first book. So I gave it some thought. I started thinking, well, if I did this as a sketchbook journal that he's writing in, there's a lot of things I could do for the character that I couldn't do otherwise. Like, what if he's just not talking for a month and he's just drawing things? And what if when he starts to get manic and crazed towards the end, he just starts scribbling things and the writing gets sloppy? So all these things that I got kind of excited about are things that you actually can't do. Like, we had to use a font that could be translated into other languages. We can't make it illegible. She didn't want pages and pages and pages of no story. So none of those things happened, but I got excited enough about the things I could do that I came on board for using art in the book. So we finally have enough for a pitch. At this point, it's been a few months. I don't know if we're into 2008 at this point. Connie wants to bring it to the sales team. First, she's got to get it approved by all the editors that she works with. Then she's got to get it approved by, that's the acquisitions team. And then she's got to get it approved by a sales team that thinks, okay, we can take this idea, go out on the town and sell this idea, this book, to stores and markets and whatever. So she's got to get pretty much everybody in her company on board for Happyface. I, naive as I was like, great, go ahead, do it. Let me know when we're ready. We'll finish up this book. I didn't realize that she was as nervous about it as she was.
After nearly a year of developing the outline, shaping the story, and working on art and design, Steve finally had a full outline and 70 or so pages with the text and art fully laid out. Like Diary of a Wimpy Kid, the text and art complemented each other, and each page/spread as its own design. At this point, Steve wasn't even signed up yet. He had done all this fantastic work on spec, and now it was up to me to bring it to our acquisitions committee. I was a wreck. What if it didn't pass? What would I tell Steve? Where would I hide so he couldn't hunt me down and make me pay for wasting a year of his life? Fortunately, it passed, and I nearly passed out when I heard the news. Connie Shu.
She told me later, like, the whole way she approached me about writing a book is totally not how it goes, and she was totally out of line. She was nervous for months, like, what if he can't write a book? Like, what if it comes out bad and I've wasted months and months of his life on this thing? Luckily, we did good, and she got it through the acquisition team, through the sales team. She called me up and we've got a book, we're doing this. So that was exciting, and I was off to the races then from there. So for the next half a year or so, I'm taking monthly trips up to New York to go over chapters and notes with Connie and talk things out. I'm holed up in my studio apartment working on Emo Boy and working on Happyface, having some challenges with the story, but otherwise moving forward at a good pace. There were certain chapters that she felt didn't fit in or weren't as good as some of the other chapters I had written, so trying to find ways to get a certain idea across, but like not the way that I had written it. The original ideas I had were darker. A lot of them were a little too dark. Some of the language was not just too adult but aggressive. Like there was some ugly language and bullying in there. I remember there was one part where he throws himself down the stairs, and I remember like his mouth was all bloody, so he had like the happy face but his mouth was all busted up and he was laughing, and she's like, that's kind of nightmarish. Maybe we don't put that in there. The Gretchen character had this backstory that was almost so emotionally ambitious and grand that she thought it kind of overshadowed Happyface's story. So we ended up scaling way back on telling Gretchen's story and just kind of used it as fuel to write the character and know where she's coming from, but not have it, be more dramatic or grand than what Happyface was going through. By the time I got to the end, this is stupid. I mean, it's crazy that I didn't see what I was doing until I could look at it in full retrospect. I mean, I was writing about a kid whose family was split up and he moved to a new town and started a new life. I was writing about what I went through in high school. I was writing about my own parents' divorce, moving in with my grandparents, starting a new life and having a chip on my shoulder and not wanting to be the person I was before. I mean, it's something that I lived and I went through, and I didn't know I was writing it like the entire time, and it's as clear as day. But I thought I had come up with this concept of Happyface and I was telling his story. Even a major character death in the book is taken from real life. It's not the same person who died in my life that died in the book. There's things that I would take from life and I would change the characters around, but I would keep the emotions. That's something that I've kind of kept in my storytelling, like to this day. I try to think of what a story is going to be, and then I think, okay, well, what is it that I know that I can write about that's going to get me these emotions? So I find a way to kind of take these real life experiences and kind of cloak them in a different story so that I can tell that story as accurately as possible. And so that it's something that's interesting for me to talk about. It's that self-expression and wanting to write therapeutically. And this was a very therapeutic book. This was something that I absolutely had to write. We just had a few more steps before the book would come out, so we had to get it to copy editing. So Christine Ma does. She did the copy editing on all of my books, and working with a copy editor, I think I described it once as trying to have a conversation with somebody but every single sentence they interrupt you and say, could you clarify that? And did you mean to say this? And you actually said that in the last sentence, and you use this word twice there. You might not want to do that. And I actually fact checked that, and that's not quite accurate. I think you could actually do this. So it sounds horribly annoying. Apologies to Christine, but it makes the book so much better. And if you think you don't need a copy editor, every single sentence of a full book had at least one note on it. Most sentences had more than one note. So she's worth her weight in gold. Everybody go out and hire Christine Ma. Next up was the cover. So the cover was done by Ben Montner. I tried designing my own book cover for it, and it was just like drawings and sketches and little writings, and this is so simple and so iconic, and it's so brilliant, especially if you see the hardcover. The hardcover has like a flap that covers just half of it, and so you see the smiley face, and when you look under the cover, it's a frowning face, and it's the entire story in one image. It's just brilliant. And the number of emails that I got that started with, I saw this bright yellow book staring at me from the bookcase. I don't think the book would have been as successful if it had any other cover than this. So at this point, we're just kind of months away from publication, which was in May of 2010. I get a call and I'm at work, and it's from Connie. And Connie and Alvina are on the line, and they're so excited. And you got your first review from Publishers Weekly. It's a starred review. And they were so excited to tell me, and I had no idea what a starred review is. I was like, yeah, good review. Awesome. Of course it's a good review. I wrote the book. It's an awesome book. Like, I was so naive. I didn't understand what a big deal this was. This is my debut book, locked into publishing it. Everything was very fortuitous and smooth. Fortuitous, is that the right word? But everything was going just right, and so we got this first review, and I nearly wept when I heard the review because it was just so passionate, and I felt like I really did something good. So a starred review, there's 6 major publications that can give you a starred review, and that means of everything we reviewed this month, we especially recommend this book. We're giving it our stamp of approval. So a book can have no stars. It can be well reviewed and have no stars. You can get 1 star, 2 star, you can get all the way up to 6 stars. Happyface took 3 stars. 3 out of 6 of those publications gave it a starred review, and that was my first book. Wintertown and Bright Lights, Dark Nights each got 2 stars. So Happyface is still the best reviewed book that I did. And for that to be my debut experience was just unheard of. Like, that was as good as that could have gone. Now that day that I'm at work and I get that call and I'm told about the starred review, this day will always stand out in my mind because one of my coworkers announced that she was pregnant and she was having her 3rd child. And it was the talk of the office. Oh my God, congrats, we're so happy for you. And I remember explaining to somebody, I just got my first book review. It's a starred review. And the blank face that I got, and this kind of, oh, you wrote a book and it got a good review? Okay, that's weird. And I was like, that's Connecticut. There was a part of me that wanted so bad to leave Connecticut that day because I felt like nobody really understood me or what I was trying to do, and getting married and having the babies and moving into the house is the Connecticut life. And writing your book and getting a starred review is, okay, that's a cool hobby. That's Connecticut. So the good reviews kept coming in. Kirkus gave me a good review. Connie told me Kirkus is notoriously harsh and notoriously hard to get a good review from, so to get a starred review from them was a big deal. And then Voya also gave me a starred review. The things that they would say about my book just really filled me with a lot of pride and joy. And then the book came out and I got fan mail. So I started getting emails from people saying this book changed my life and I was Happyface and I knew a Happyface. It became known as a book for reluctant readers for two basic reasons. One, because I was a male author. Boys tended to be reluctant readers, so to have a young adult coming of age novel from a male point of view, and then also having art was kind of a bridge from comic books and graphic novels to reading novels. So it was a book that was often referred to as a book for reluctant readers. If somebody's not generally a reader, this is one they might like. Visual novels, especially with Diary of a Wimpy Kid, became a huge thing. I like to think that Happyface itself was influential in the rise of visual novels, but it was a pretty rare thing. There were not many, if not like in this, probably enough that you could fit on one hand. And since then it's kind of exploded into its own genre, but at the time it was still pretty new. So this is a post-mortem, and I'm telling you everything there is to know about Happyface, so I'll talk about numbers a bit. So the advance they gave me was for $12,000, which means this is what we think we can sell for this book. We're going to give you this amount to write it, and they give you part of it on signing, part of it on delivery, part of it on publication. So Happyface ended up doing so well that it earned out its advance multiple times over. So until you reach a point of sales where they've made their $12,000 back, you don't get anything else aside from the $12,000 they gave you. After that, you start earning royalties. So I remember getting a royalty check for $10,000. I got a royalty check for $5,000. So every 6 months I'd get another royalty check as it continued to sell. It's definitely the best-selling thing that I'd ever written. Post-mortem time, reviewing. How do I think this went? I think Happyface went as magically and perfectly as it could have gone. Would I have changed anything? I think my art is better now than it was then. I'd probably draw it a little better. I think I know more writing tricks and more about writing, but I don't know that I would change any of it because I feel like there's a sense of innocence that's lost in knowing too much, which sounds more grandiose than I mean it, but when you know so much about structure and writing and making everything perfect and this is the way it's supposed to be and it's got to do this, that, Happyface was so much me exploring writing and storytelling and my story it just came purely from my heart. It was a heart project, and it was something that I don't think I could have written the same way at any other point in my career. It had to be written that way at that time. And I think it kind of comes across as very authentic, and it may not be the most polished thing in the world, but it's very pure and it is what it is, and I think it's relatable and it's something that people connect to in a special way because of that. Happyface was my life for 3 years. It's such an important book to me that I can't imagine wanting to change anything about it. The low points of working on Happyface were learning how to write, the stress of doing that and doing the movie at the same time, all the life upheaval stuff. It was a very stressful time at the beginning. It was also extremely exciting time, going to New York and going to the Little Brown offices and meeting with Connie and stopping in and saying hello to the sales team. I mean, those were really exciting, cool moments to be an author and feel like, being an author is a good thing for an introvert to be, because so much of it is sitting at home holed up by yourself with your brain and a laptop, just putting your ideas out there and living through your characters and building this world that comes from your head. And then you go to these conventions and suddenly people are asking for autographs and, oh my God, you're an author, can you sign this book, and can you do a talk over here? And you're standing in front of audiences of people, and you're traveling, and people are, you know, taking you out to dinner and getting a car for you, and like you're a celebrity for a weekend. And some authors are really good at being celebrities. I think they're more in tune with their extrovert self, and they can dazzle audiences, and they know just what to say, and they love getting up there, and they're invited to all the conventions. I'm not that person so much. I mean, it is fun, and you get swept into it, and then you got to go back home, and the whole time you're home, you're like, oh, I don't want to go out and travel, and I'm so nervous, and I don't want to talk in front of a big group of people. And then you do it, and you're a celebrity for a week or a few days, and you come back home, and you're like, oh, nobody's doting on me, and I'm all by myself, and I gotta just sit here and write again. And then suddenly it's difficult for a week. The high points of doing Happyface, I think, were getting those great reviews. It's such a acknowledgement that, you know, okay, maybe I'm not an imposter. Like, maybe I deserve to write a book. Maybe I do have some talent. Getting the fan mail, I always think of every piece of fan mail I get as if somebody read one of my books and they were touched enough to the point that they wanted to write me and let me know how much it meant to them. That's my kind of person, because that means they relate to me, because my books are so personal. If somebody read my book and they identified with it, then I'm like, cool, you're a good person. you're a friend of Steve then, because it's almost like saying, you know, I relate to you, and I appreciate what you've been through and the way you think. I don't know, maybe that means nothing. And just having the book published, I mean, having the hardcover book, when I first got the package from Little Brown, and it's got a big bow tie on it, and a card from Connie saying congrats, it's a real thing, you birthed the book, and having that thing to hold, and especially something like Happyface where there's so much art in it. It's not just words. Like it's a piece of art now, and it's real, and it's professional, and it's printed, and everything just amazing looking. So having the book was a high point. It's a cool experience that I recommend. Okay, one last story. The book launch party. So I was nervous about having a book launch party. I didn't want to do it. I don't want to stand in front of people and talk. I think I prepared for 20 minutes, and then they told me at the last minute, like, typically our authors go 45 minutes. So I was like, okay, I got to double the length of my speech now. Something that I was super nervous about. And so Connie and Alvina were actually going to come in from New York. So this was in Madison, my hometown, or where I lived with my grandparents, just down the street from them at R.J. Julia's, which is a really well-known indie bookstore in Connecticut, and I think nationally known as like a good spot for authors to go. A lot of big names go there and have their talks. So it's kind of cool that I was having a book release party there, and then I got to have a talk there, but very nervous about it. Alvina and Connie took the train in from New York, so they wanted to be there for it. They were going to take me out to dinner beforehand and asked me if I wanted to invite any people. I kind of didn't want to. I just wanted to get through with the day. I didn't want to do anything else. And my grandmother wanted me to have everybody over afterwards, and they could all come have cake, and I didn't want to do that either. I was like, that's embarrassing, and I don't have parties. I'm not going to invite a bunch of people over to my grandparents' house. So it was a very nerve-wracking day. There also turned out to be a massive storm that day, like downpours of rain, like tree branches in the streets, like a horrible, like near hurricane storm that day. So I did invite some people to this dinner. At one point, Connie said, "Are these all your ex-girlfriends?" I said, "No, two of them are ex-girlfriends. The other ones are just friends." But she thought I had like gathered all these ex-girlfriends of mine to show them, like, I'm an author now. This is my fancy dinner. Definitely not the case. The book release party turned out to be a pretty big success. I think there were like 40 people there, which I don't know, maybe 40 doesn't sound like a lot of people, but in a small indie bookstore, like, it was pretty packed, considering the weather and everything, that all those people showed up, and not just friends and family like the Wintertown book release party went. These were like just people that showed up. My old art teacher was there. My family was there, but a whole bunch of like students and teens were there. So Connie did like a whole introduction for me. So I'm in the back and they're getting my microphone set up. Connie stood up and introduced me and read a letter that she had received from somebody and talked about what a big deal this was, and they welcomed me out, and I did good. I was funny, and everybody had questions and participated. Unbeknownst to me, my grandmother was going around inviting everybody to her house afterwards, so that party was happening whether I wanted it or not. So afterwards, we all went to my grandparents' house, which again was like maybe 5 minutes down the street. Connie and Alvina... Sorry, I have a hard time talking about my grandparents. So Connie and Alvina got to see, my bedroom where I grew up and the house I had lived in since I was 14 years old. My grandparents got to meet a lot of my current friends. It was a big deal that they got to experience that and they got to see that stuff. My grandmother in particular always called herself my number one fan. She read anything I did, whether it was just comic books I made for myself or my old comic strips. I would always bring them to her to read. I don't think everybody in my family, or even most people in my family, read Happyface or any of my books, which is fine. It's not everybody's a reader, and if you're a reader, you want to read what you want to read. Not everybody's into young adult. But my grandmother always read what I wrote. She made all these Happyface cookies, these little yellow cookies with a happy face on them, and she had this whole t-shirt with the happy face. She was beside herself over it. She actually got me on TV for this too. She would write like newspapers and media outlets. My grandson is a local author and you should have him on. And so I was on like the Connecticut local news style segment. Could not have gone worse. I was terrible. I was so stiff and awkward. It was bad, but she loved this stuff, and I don't know. That's part of Happyface. The writing of it, so much of it was about that time in my life when I left one town for the other and I came to live with my grandparents, and they changed my life. And they were healthy and well for the Happyface experience. Less so with each additional book, and now neither of them are with us. So Happyface was a very special time. It was a very special time in my life. For me.